Now, of course, Franklin Cudjoe is a member of that committee set up by government to deal with forex flow. Now, he's been speaking to us also about the Multimedia Group's 25th anniversary, so we got a little bit of everything in this conversation when I caught up with him yesterday. The recent news of the committee, which was established sometime last year by the Finance Ministry to look into some matters regarding our foreign exchange situation. That news has been making the rounds, and of course, we couldn't help but notice that you're a member of this committee. But there is still confusion about what this committee is supposed to do in the first place. What's your understanding of your terms of reference and what you're there for?
Thank you very much. I would have loved the Secretariat, the Finance Ministry to be doing this, but I can understand. And I actually understand the consternation that has been expressed, not just facially, but through words as well, and almost the satirical aspects of it as well, at the mention of this committee. Precisely so, because the politicians have politicized the issues of the currency. So any semblance of a committee of persons, however eminent, however noble, however disorderly, that have been put together to do something about, understand any aspect of it, could be termed to be probably a superfluous committee, and that, like the famous words of Ross Perot, if you see a snake, kill it and don't set up committees. But the sole reason why some of us accepted, in fact, my team agreed that I should represent the institution on it, is because we understood the terms of reference quite clearly, and that this is not a parallel body, independent body to usurp the mandate of the Central Bank of Ghana. In fact, the Central Bank has a more powerful representative on the committee, and we've made that clear. I remember during the inauguration, the Deputy Minister made that clear. I also made it clear as well that if anything of the sort were to happen, then it would have deviated from the purpose. But the main reason why the committee, we joined the committee, was because there was an understanding that the transparency needed in the management of currency flows was not enough, which actually meant that looking at the informal sector of that part of the conversation was useful. So for instance, I mean, if the country reported, in a hypothetical sense, reported a $10 billion receipt, officially reported, but actually we could record just 7 billion, and not that the 3 billion was stolen by a group of people working in tandem to do that, but simply because they are avenues that these things are being externalized and we are not recording properly. It's important to understand that. So GUTA, for instance, is there because they are the last layer that actually interface with our international trading community. Are there persons who know that they are engaging in trading and using physical cash? What could be done about it? Should we interest ourselves in travelers' checks? Because a plane load from Ghana to Asia each time, according to my good friend lawyer Fosudote, carried not less than $300,000 on that plane. With the hindsight of international payments systems, it could be useful that we are doing this and settling payments in our own currency, so that we do not, as it were, carry a lot from here outside as well. So to understand, not just sit at your desk and say, well, I'm the central bank and I'm close to the power to intervene in the economy, and at least to do currency management and to ensure that the volatility of the cedi doesn't go wayward. There's some understanding that this committee of people who are mostly deal with forex. I mean, probably I'm the only one as an institution, and I understand the reason because we deal in this policy space. But almost everybody on that committee deals with forex. The Seaboard, Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors, who through their own actions informally had actually saved the economy $1 billion. So they have knowledge, which could be useful to the committee. You understand? GUTA has a lot of knowledge to help the committee. I think, for instance, that if the government says they have embarked on the paperless POS systems and revenues are being recorded, because a couple of days ago they said there's a 3.2% increase over the last year's revenues. Well, that may seem noble. I believe they could have gotten more had they not embarked on this fishing expedition of revising the benchmark values at the ports for certain goods which were useful, but it's now being bastardized and abused, and the government is losing critical revenue, critical currency that could help shore up its reserves. I should be able to tell the Vice President this, or tell the committee, that the Finance Minister, that, well, you see, while you are trying to do this, there are aspects of your policies that are not helping. This is not something I suspect the Bank of Ghana may know, but it's not really within their remit. I would have to interface with traders to find out this useful information. Or when the Agric Minister says that, well, look, we've been bleeding a lot because of our staples. Some of them could be localized here and then substituted here rather, because you're losing $1.5 billion every year to that. That's useful. There's something he wants to do about it. But I'll say to him, or say to the government, but you had the perfect opportunity to change that surgically through your one district, one factory business. Instead of spreading the factories like toffees across the place and wasting critical startup capital, why don't you surgically approach the issue? And by doing so, you'd have been helping the currency flow issues. Whether all of this is known is another matter. But certainly, there is some space for this type of, and I'm a student of how governments can make the life of its independent bodies a hell. And truly, if the got understanding that the Bank of Ghana's powers were going to be usurped, there was no way of being part of the committee. In fact, if the Bank of Ghana rep had not showed up that day as part of the inauguration and made statements as well to the effect that their powers are not being usurped, I probably wouldn't have joined as well. So I had faith.
Now, we have these institutions. The Bank of Ghana exists, the Finance Ministry exists, the Economic Management Team exists, even the Agric Ministry exists, Imani exists. You are already doing these things. You are already doing analysis of policy. You are putting out your opinions, your views, your findings. They are available to the government. Why do you feel that 40 people should be put together to do something that people are already doing, just to solve a problem that we've had for decades?
I'll answer the question in two ways. First of all, the thought that committees are not necessarily needed may be difficult to take because, well, first of all, the committee is made of 40 people. The 40 people don't meet at the go all the time. There are subcommittees. I think there are 5 subcommittees. Some are dealing with currency flows, the transparency within that sector, which is the committee on which I sit, together with the trade minister and a couple of others. There's the innovations within the currency management space as well. There's a committee to deal with that, and there are reps on the various places you've mentioned on the committee, which, by the way, is on merit. What's it called? It's unremunerated, by the way. There are no certain allowances, except if they give food, I'll eat. But to also answer the question that these things are being done already in silos by the various institutions and all of that. So what is really new? Well, sometimes if you don't box people to get closer, you probably wouldn't get the necessary vibe. I recall the conversation around the wage bill during Tekpe's time. Now, individuals, everybody says it. On your show at the time, you did speak about the fact that the wage bill is too humongous and that it's swallowing up almost all our revenues. Everybody said it, but until a committee was formed, which again I was the only civil society member, to go into and understand what was really happening. We didn't know, for instance, that out of 12 billion CD wage bill, for instance, about 8 billion of that were just allowances, right? Interfacing with the various institutions, which we did. we went into their books and said, give us your plan. About how many institutions? About 12 or 20 that we lined up and talked to. We were able to determine their strategic plan and told them to cut off this part or wean off some of the institutions that were subvented on the government payroll. So about 22 of them were weaned off. And when the work was done, some significant savings were made. But everybody else spoke about the fact that the wage bill is too high. So sometimes there's some space for some of these committees. I would think that, yes, we've gotten to this level because the politicians themselves have been the ones sneering at themselves when one of them is in power and doesn't seem to have a clue as to what to do. So all the sneering, the jeers are in order. In fact, I enjoyed them. I saw a headline that said, gurus have been giving birth to, what's it called, rescue the city. In fact, it was more graphic than I'm actually saying it, and I couldn't help but laugh. And the person made it sound as if he was there giving birth to these gurus. But it's allowed, and I would think that the communication should have been done properly by the ministry, but I yield.
I mean, is that not actually perhaps the problem? The fact that these committees are necessary, is that not the problem? Because like the wage bill example you gave, that knowledge was there. The knowledge that about 8 billion out of the, about 8 billion out of however much we are spending, 12 billion or whatever on the wage bill, about 8 billion of it was allowances. That knowledge was there, but no one was doing anything about it. So the fact that committees have to come together before things get done, is that not in itself a problem that we need to solve?
Well, like they say, in producing products, there are different ideas. Until those ideas are authenticated, there wouldn't be knowledge. I would think it's the same for this type of scenarios, policy scenarios as well. Like I said, everybody knew the wage bill was bloated, but nobody had done a surgical, surgery to see that while this is there, how do we wean off those aspects that could be done properly? Should we have a conversation about having quasi-private entities? So the whole conversation moved on, and I think this administration had decided that they set up something called SIGA, which is supposed to be the newer version of the State Enterprises Commission, with a mandate that all state entities should be seen as quasi-private entities and returning profits. It was following from that work. Like I said, we found out that some of the institutions could actually make money. They do make money, but because the state feeds off them, their internally generated funds were halved, or actually 2/3 was given to the state. That position has reversed for some institutions. And there's legacy issues that to be dealt with. Unfortunately, well, as it is, like they say, the politician acts like a stranger with wide eyes. But until he becomes a fellow of a space, that's when they begin to learn some of these lessons. So for me, it's an honor really. It's national service, and I suspect that after 3 months, after which we would have done our work, because there's a team that is scoping to see these things, and then we'll just guide and review the results.
So if a committee has to be formed, a 14-member committee has to be formed in order for whatever leakages are contributing to our forex, the value of our CD depreciating and our forex reserves dwindling, whatever is leading to those situations, if a committee has to be formed to identify the obvious and then take action, then should those who are being paid to do it, should they not either be sanctioned, fired, and so forth?
Well, I think those who are being paid to do it have been clothed with the constitutional mandate to set up these committees anyway. I would think that it becomes superfluous if indeed what the committees they set up eventually tend to do the same things. I mean, without being very, sarcastic, I think that for example, the EC's Committee of Eminent Persons have been formed because primarily, I would think that the EC had shown that it's incapable of running the elections. In that regard, that's a separate conversation to have. I would see that the commission is like a cloak just to excuse.
Committee, you mean?
Oh, not the Forex.
Oh, you're talking about the EC.
I'm talking about the EC.
Okay.
Because the eminent persons, really, somebody can also ask, what is their locus? Are they going to pray? Because there are a lot of prayerful men on that committee. But at least they have said something that I thought was very useful. That look, the EC, you haven't done proper engagement. Go and do engagement. But that's after the fact. Did the committee know that the EC had procured the services of a very expensive service provider quietly before they were brought on board? They didn't know. So I feel the committee is being used, but we are not being used. If there's a likelihood that we are being used, we'll jump.
Well, you know, you brought up the issue of this, another example, the EC and the advisory committee. The EC is not bound by law to take any of the advice that the advisory committee gives them.
And that's a plunderous law.
But let's bring it to our issue, where it's once again relevant. Because this committee has been set up by the finance ministry. It's nice that Bank of Ghana has declared that this is not a usurping of their authority. It's nice that they declared it. But is it really up to them to declare that, or is it up to the law? If a committee which was set up by the finance ministry comes up with findings that the Bank of Ghana, for example, does not agree with, are they bound to
The finance ministry was just a conduit to set up the committee. The directive was coming from the economic
management team.
There's another body, economic, the name just escapes me now, which is an amalgam of, which is at the presidency. So it means the backstops really with them. It's a cabinet decision. So the finance ministry is the conveyor belt really to do this, which is why it is sourced in terms of its membership.
But that doesn't change the fact that Bank of Ghana is still independent.
No, but the Bank of Ghana's independence is obviously intervene in the issues surrounding currency management. We are not managing currency. We are not supposed to do anything to help deal with the volatility of the currency. Those are not, we are not imbued with those special powers.
So are you saying none of your findings will have to be implemented by Bank of Ghana?
No, the Bank of Ghana will take that as informational, and it could help. It's not a matter of not being bound. I mean, it will be useful to them. Because you see, it's different sitting behind your computer, looking forlornly at the numbers and saying, wow, my international reserves are dwindling. What can I do? You may do some market surveillance, one or two, but really, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to scan the entirety. I mean, look at the Bank of Ghana. How much supervision did they do to bring us into this financial mess that we have right now? Imagine being asked now to go on the market to go and find out how come some people are externalizing some of our currencies. I feel it's just too much to ask of them, because their role is sanctimonious as it is, and I don't think anybody would deserve them. I'm very much minded. Look, in 2015, when the UK government gave me some opportunity to do travel in the UK, one of the places I visited was and had a meeting was with the Director of Development of the Central Bank of England. And I asked we had the conversations around policy from governments as against their independence. And then he did say something to me that I should go back and tell my politicians that the moment there's a semblance that they can control the central bank, they would have lost the plot. To the extent that the Central Bank of England now publishes its minutes unedited. Their monetary policy committee's meetings are published unedited. Tells you the level of independence, right? And not the Minister of Finance or Secretary for the Chancellor of the Exchequer could usurp the powers of the Central Bank of England. It wouldn't happen.
Is that the case here in Ghana?
Well, not entirely. It should not be the case, but in some regard, sometimes it has been. And I suspect it's one of the reasons we had this financial mess. It looks to me that the current central bank governor has asserted some of his independence, but I wouldn't say totally.
What do you think of this new currency, just as an aside, these new denominations that have been printed? Has that helped or harmed our efforts to strengthen our currency?
Well, that's a perfect question, which dovetails into the conversations about the independence of the central bank, but without the necessary knowledge of what the markets really would tell you sometimes. Didn't the bank recently say that they've seen, in fact, there are news reports that suggest that some people were not accepting their bills, not because they didn't hear about it or they didn't know about it. There's a reason to find out why that was actually necessary. I thought really it was completely unnecessary. I mean, the excuses that were advanced did not really make sense. I mean, to think that 50 cedi was almost at par with the dollar, almost $9, I think, that is not too bad, because the other currencies we compare with are within that range. And I thought that there was no need to have these larger bills, and apparently it was going to serve just certain types of consumers who engage in large transactions. For crying out loud, we are moving into the space of seamless cash settlements anyway. So, well, as it is, you don't hear much of it anyway. I've not even seen the bill. That's how, I don't know whether you've seen it.
I saw one yesterday for the first
But you
time.
don't have it. That's not good. I've not even cited any. I've only seen the advert. And again, it's part of this whole conversations about managing the communication. I think the communication was wobbly. It was just thrust upon us. And even in other jurisdictions that have larger bills, they are trying to shy away and withdraw the bills from the system. I think the Eurozone is even trying to restrict, if not already, the 500 euro bill. So we cannot be, and especially when we didn't know the circumstances under which these bills were procured, who had the contract, how much was paid. All of these things also have been part of the conversations about the opacity of our institutions when it comes to these kinds of things.
So you have 3 months to do your work with this committee. What are you hoping the outcomes will be?
Well, the outcomes would have been that we would have found the antidote to the issues around the opacity of currency flows, and then made our recommendations. As it is, we are not an enforcement agency. So, yes, we would give it out. And the good is that no committee member would be sanctioned from speaking to the recommendation, so that it wouldn't be like the Ayawaso West Wagon Committee that did its work, and then there was some other whitening of the report, and up to now I don't know whether it's been whitened already or it's still in the dark. I don't think that will happen here.
So hopefully 3 months from now, you and your colleagues on the committee would have figured out what the IGP couldn't, just how to arrest the city.
Probably how to arrest the recalcitrant city, not the aspect of the city, which is in this case the ones that are not recorded, but not the city itself, which had been apparently arrested and jailed by the vice president. We are not dealing with that type of city. We are dealing with the other city that is not seen at all. We are not dealing with the city that is not seen at all. But the one they have dealt with the city that you see, but which they can't catch by misbehaving.
So it is fair to say that the committee is mandated to find solutions to our devaluing currency.
I would think you are not far from, I mean, it's part of a conversation, but that obviously is not overriding import of it. I think it's important that the parts of this conversation about the city which we are dealing with should be distinct from the entire aspect of rescuing the city. In fact, we are not on the mission. I'm not Captain Planet. I could never rescue the city. I would think that we would rather suggest ways by which other trade winds that are headed towards the direction of the recalcitrant city are actually dealt with. And that I suspect is our mandate.
So, well, I mean, it's been 25 years. Do you remember the first time you heard Joy?
Oh, I do. And that was supposed to have been a live interview. It was a lady who must have done the interview. I've forgotten the personality that was interviewed, but I believe that was it was a lady who anchored that program. And I thought, well, this was the dawn of a new beginning, especially when we had come from an era where it was so difficult to express yourself. And to think that you have now a sophisticated equipment, which was new to us in this part of our world, to, as it were, disseminate important information without being hindered, was quite welcoming. And I thought that the events that followed after the birth of Joy FM, actually, are all out there for us to see. And certainly some of us have been impacted greatly. And we have used the platform to also advance not just our personal careers of an institution, but also help advance the cause of our democracy because of the subjects that were discussed on those platforms.
Do you remember what you were doing in your life at the time when you first, heard of this free media house, first non-government controlled, media house?
Well, I was a student. I was a student, and I think at the time, some of us relied on radio stations that were transmitted over the AM, they call it AM, right, internationally. And I was an avid follower of international news, so the VOAs and the BBCs. I had a smaller radio. So with the advent of FM, I thought that, and obviously it was clearer, it aided the whole enterprise of information sharing and indeed knowledge acquisition. So yes, I was a student at the time, so it was much easier now to listen to local news brewed in Ghana and obviously from all facets of society. So for me, it was quite a journey to begin radio with and to begin the understanding of what constitutes really or the makeup of Ghana.
What sort of things did you listen to back in those early days of Joy?
Well, again, you were measuring up against the likes of the national broadcaster, which incidentally had a lot of well-seasoned broadcasters and what have you. But it was a tunnel view because, again, we're presented with what the state wanted us to hear, no matter the impeccably fluent language or English language that was spoken by the broadcasters. You could tell something obviously was amiss. But with the advent of Joy FM, you could tell that there was an alternative. The news programming itself was different. The subjects that were discussed were also quite different. It was beginning to look like there is an alternative to the state broadcaster. And that for me as a natural libertarian was important because then I have choice, really. And I must say that you've measured up and you've done quite well.
Did you have a favorite show, for example? Did you tune in for the music, the news?
Music, not necessarily. It came for me as an added-on, but typically the morning shows, because I was a student of international affairs, current affairs. So for me, the morning shows were the most useful ones to me. And I think that a lot of what was being discussed at the time, and to think that you had a host with a very powerful production team that had done its work, that was engaging the public on critical issues that were happening on the spur of the moment, was very useful. And like I said, not like the state broadcaster, whose newsreel would have to be heavily edited to suit a certain narrative. But there's a complete antithesis to what should happen in a very regulated, if you like, a socialist society. So it was the birth of freedom, basically. So the news, the morning shows were useful because they were current affairs, really laden, and they were discussive. So at least, and it was interactive as well. So that obviously made a difference.
Do you have any specific memories? Do you remember a particular show, a particular topic that was discussed, a particular event or national issue that was discussed on Joy that you
Well, let me just backtrack a bit and say that before we got on Joy as a think tank or even as an individual, I recall I'd spoken with Komladumo, the late Komladumo, may he so rest in peace, and I told him that, well, look, I'm a young man who believes that this country could be changed through policy analysis, especially coming from a young man and a team of young people. And one thing they said was, well, if I put you up immediately, people would think that you've actually paid us to promote you. And it was speaking to a certain narrative, which meant that at the time, it was even difficult to have alternate views, let alone to think that there were younger people who were getting into the fray of policy analysis, which was a domain for the gray-haired and possibly those who had more wisdom.
And that's President of Imani Africa, Franklin Cudjoe, sharing his reflections as Joy Moment as the multimedia group celebrates its 25th anniversary, as well as Joy FM. Earlier, he talked about the committee that was outdoored last week, exactly a week today, really, by the Finance Ministry to look into forex flows.